The Iran war has entered a new phase involving an old ally and what sounds like my Spanish uncle. Over the weekend, Iran launched 2 intermediate-range ballistic missiles targeting Diego Garcia. That Iran would strike a base in the middle of a war is not surprising. What is kind of surprising is just how far the missiles traveled. In fact, you might have deduced the long distance given that these images look nothing like the Gulf region. But what is definitely surprising is how Diego Garcia is a British base, and that the United Kingdom has been reluctant to play a major role in the war so far. Well, in the aftermath of the attack, the United Kingdom gave the United States the thumbs up to use its bases to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. It is a development that goes well beyond the confines of the Gulf region or the Indian Ocean, and the impact could eventually find its way to places like Brussels. So, in today's video, we will cover exactly what happened with Iran's attack on Diego Garcia, exactly how new of a development the ballistic missiles are for Iran, what the United Kingdom did in response, and how this fits into the broader context of not only this war, but also European security. Let's start with some basic background and what exactly occurred. The location in question is Diego Garcia, named for a Spanish explorer and not any of my relatives. It is a British base that the United States partially leases. What makes it unique is how it is out in the middle of nowhere in the Indian Ocean. That is surprisingly advantageous because it allows long-range bombers to cover some far-flung targets while still being too far away for opponents to strike. For example, the United States used it in both the 1991 Gulf War and the 2003 Iraq War, plus the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan. It is also a stunningly beautiful island, as you will see in this never-ending rotation of images from it. Anyway, I should clarify an earlier sentence. It was out of range for US opponents until the weekend. Iran fired 2 intermediate-range ballistic missiles from the southern end of the country toward Diego Garcia. One failed in flight. The United States may have shot down the other with an SM-3 interceptor. It is also possible that the Iranian missile just missed entirely, foreshadowing a point for later in the video. Thus, the only things of note here are the use of the missiles itself and the country targeted. For full disclosure, Iran denied having lobbed any missiles in that direction, but I would not recommend putting much trust in official Iranian statements at the moment. Indeed, this marks the first use of intermediate-range ballistic missiles at that range in any war. The United States and Soviet Union agreed to scrap that class of land-based missiles in the 1980s. They gave the opponent little warning time until impact. Both sides worried that if the class of missile existed at all, the other might be concerned that an incoming one could be nuclear-tipped. The target might have then wrongly inferred that its nuclear missiles were in a use-it-or-lose-it situation, resulting in an actual nuclear launch. 20 minutes later, you get the full nuclear apocalypse. The superpowers fixed the problem by simply removing intermediate-range ballistic missiles from the picture. In turn, up until recently, the United States limited its arsenal in that class to naval systems. Whenever Washington wanted to call in a strike, the ship would navigate closer to the target before firing, say, a Tomahawk. Hence, Iran's move here is historically unique, though the rise of China and Russia's cheating on the deal caused the treaty to get scrapped. Thus, we might soon be seeing them more often. Returning to our focus, the political reaction to Iran's move has been interesting. I want to start on Iran's side of the equation here, and whether Iran lied about its missile program. Previously, Iran had claimed that it would limit its missile ranges to 2,000 kilometers, about half the range of what we saw with Diego Garcia. Ostensibly, this was to threaten Israel while reassuring Europe that there was no need to target Iran's efforts to build up its stockpiles. The restriction was not a part of any treaty obligation. Rather, it was an apparently pragmatic policy from Tehran. Then everything changed when the Israeli nation attacked in June 2025, and the United States dropped the hammer over Iran's nuclear sites. In the aftermath, the Ayatollah lifted the self-imposed limitation. Now, I need to add some significant caveats to that argumentation. It is not like Iran's newfound missile range came out of nowhere, and the notion that the pair of wars caused Iran to extend missile ranges is overstated. On a smaller scale, missile ranges are a function of payloads. If you have a 2,000-kilometer missile that houses a 1,000-kilogram warhead, what you actually have is a 2,800-kilometer missile and 1,000 kilograms putting on the brakes for 800 kilometers. Up to you to figure out the trade-off between damage and distance. On a grander scale, Iran formed a space agency in 2004. 5 years later, Iran had its first satellite in orbit. Here's the thing. All space programs are intercontinental ballistic missile programs with extra steps. That is a major reason how NASA managed to consume more than 4% of the federal budget during the peak of the Cold War. Yeah, I love science too. I look forward to humans returning to the moon, and I would like to live long enough to see humans step foot on Mars. But NASA's insane budget was a positive externality of military competition. If you take the rocket that goes to space and replace its payload with a warhead capable of surviving re-entry, then congratulations, you have a very long-range weapon. I do not want to suggest that Iran was literally the turn of a couple of screws away from having a bomb that can travel 4,000 kilometers. But the notion that Iran's political limitations actually capped Iran's wartime limitations is fantastical. Iran always had the ability to conduct an attack at that range if it wanted to. It just might have required a few phone calls to engineers first. Whether you want to say that Iran lied about the situation is up to you. The end result was not surprising to people on the technical side of things. And as a broader policy point, it is usually not a good idea to base significant policy decisions on whether someone is being forthright in a situation where the incentive structure rewards obfuscation. Speaking of responses, in the immediate aftermath of the launches at Diego Garcia, the United Kingdom announced that the United States could use British bases for operations designed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Previously, British bases were only available for defensive work, like Patriots to shoot down incoming enemy missiles. Now, it is hard to judge whether this was actually a direct response to the Diego Garcia strike. 10 Downing Street had been debating this point for a while beforehand. Iran's plan here may have been to fire some warning shots to steer Starmer away from shifting stances. But now he has, and here we are. Or maybe Iran planned to specifically hit US assets on the base, which seems impractical given the missile's imprecision. I do not think that Westminster would have appreciated the distinction either way. Not to suggest that the United Kingdom is thrilled about any of this. I mentioned last week that the United States had effectively passed along the bulk of the economic costs of the war to other countries. Yes, gas prices are up in the United States, but the United States only consumes about 19% of world oil, leaving everyone else on the hook for the remaining 81%. I also mentioned that this would inevitably entrap US allies and other partners into participating in the conflict in some manner. Predictably, there were plenty of comments that Europe would never do such a thing, because the United States had created the mess, leaving the United States to clean up the mess. But this is not how the world works. There is no putting the genie back in the bottle. The elevated petrol prices perturb everyone, and the relevant strategic question is not whether a country would have preferred that the United States left Iran alone a month ago. Rather, the relevant strategic question is whether a country is better off trying to help reopen the strait or let it remain closed indefinitely. That is how you end up with a March 19th statement from a large group of countries from Europe and beyond about their vague readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage through the strait. There are some complications here. What further adventures Trump might entrap others in, whether reopening the strait will encourage Trump to fight longer, and the risk of casualties. However, energy prices being what they are, inevitably someone would make a move. The United Kingdom was the first, and it would not be surprising if there are more, even if they are careful to avoid taking steps that would put soldiers directly in harm's way. I want to close today by zooming out to the broader European context. A common interpretation of the events is that Iran was using Diego Garcia as a proxy for the European continent. 4,000 kilometers from Iran takes you past places like Brussels and Paris. fire from the right part of Iran, and you could even reach London. By comparison, 2,000 kilometers only takes you to about the triple point of Romania, Hungary, and Ukraine. In other words, Iran's limit is no longer the fringe of NATO's eastern half. It is on top of many of its largest cities and economic engines. At the moment, I cannot give firm details about just what the danger looks like, because the weapons experts are still trying to suss out what exactly Iran fired. What seems to be the case for now is that it was inaccurate and did not have a large warhead. To cap this recurring accuracy point, hitting precise targets from that kind of range is difficult. You can understand why putting a nuclear weapon on one is attractive. Accuracy is not a high priority for a megaton-level explosion. As a result, I am not sure that the Diego Garcia launch will strike the fear into European capitals that Tehran perhaps intended. In all likelihood, if Iran tried to attack Europe, its missile might just land in an empty field. Still, the Diego Garcia debacle adds a new wrinkle into any conversations about Europe's participation in a limited straight protection plan. I still see some fundamental misunderstandings of what role NATO would play in this, possibly perpetuated by Trump's own phrasing on the matter. At a default level, the answer is none. It is NATO, not MENO. And there are plenty of North Atlantic countries saying MENO want to go to the Middle East right now, and that is completely their prerogative. But every NATO member has its own agency to contribute or not contribute as it sees fit. The North Atlantic Council is only tasked with governing collective decisions, not removing sovereign choices from the allies. To reiterate an earlier point, it is hard to foresee for now any of those countries contributing by shooting. Escorting? With a show of force? Perhaps. The way this turns south is if Iran decides to start shooting missiles up to the North Atlantic. That is because such an incident would be an attack on an allied nation, which is ripe for an Article 5 situation. As a reminder, though, even that does not guarantee that 31 more countries will soon turn toward the Gulf. Remember, the text of the treaty only instructs each ally to assist the attacked country with the actions that it deems necessary to restore security in the North Atlantic area. That could, for example, be a limited strike to hit the launch site of the offending missiles. Quick in, quick out. That makes good on the reciprocal expectation of assistance that NATO is founded on, while still trying to limit the entrapment effect. Of course, the point of Article 5 is to deter that type of attack in the first place, which indirectly provides allies with greater latitude to conduct enforcement activities under a non-NATO umbrella. But there is no guarantee that Iran will pass on the opportunity. It has already crossed into dangerous territory by firing missiles on Turkey, never mind the drone affair in Cyprus. Ultimately, Diego Garcia is the latest wrinkle in an already turbulent war, with the possibility of far greater turbulence ahead. If you want to learn more about what is happening in the Middle East, check out my playlist on the subject. It is full of fun, well, maybe not fun, maybe more like full of unfun but very necessary information. Hey, cut me some slack here. This is the 24th consecutive day of videos. And on that note, if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.